So UFC 290 just took place over the weekend and it was such a banger card. I've matched every single winner with who I believe that they should fight next. And I am a little bit late to this. I normally do this as soon as the card is finished, but I did have to make other videos after the card. I had to talk about the Moreno and Pantoja fight. I had to talk about Robert Whittaker and then I had to do my UFC prediction. So I just didn't really have a time in the schedule to make this video. So I'm making the video now after the fact, a couple of days after the card is now finished, but it should be still a pretty good video, I hope, for you guys. I'm going to start with the top fight, the final fight of the night, Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez. Alexander Volkanovski won the fight, didn't seem to take much damage, but he's going to be out for a couple of months after he gets surgery on his arm. So he's probably not going to be coming back until November, December, and I'm thinking, let's do a fight night in Spain against Ilia Topuria. Ilia Topuria is a guy that is a big name in Spain. He had that footballer that seemed to be quite popular. I don't know what his name was, but he had a footballer that was really popular, a Spanish guy, hyping him up. Ilia Topuria was born in Germany, actually, sorry, but I believe he trains in Spain, or he represents Spain. You guys kind of understand what I mean. Ilia Topuria versus Volkanovski would sell out a fight night in Spain. They recently signed a Spanish fighter, Daniel Barres, who's going to be fighting in a couple of weeks' time. They've got Joel Alvarez on the roster. There's a couple of other really good Spanish prospects just around that they could sign. Spain is right beside Portugal. You've got Manuel Carp, who could fight on the card if he doesn't take too much damage against Kai Kara France. It's also quite close to the UK, France, and just other countries which the UFC does have prospects that they could put on the card. So I think that you could do a pretty good card in Spain, Volkanovski versus Rodriguez. I think that would make sense. I really think that would be a great idea. I think having a card in Spain would be great for the UFC. I think it would build up MMA and the UFC in Spain. But if you didn't want to do that, you could just do Volkanovski versus Topuria, elsewhere, or you could do Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev maybe sometime next year, because we know Volkanovski's not going to be able to fight in October. Who knows who Makhachev's going to fight in October, even if he does fight in October. But Volkanovski's got options. He could fight Ilia Topuria, he could fight Aljamain Sterling, he could fight Islam Makhachev. We don't know. It's pretty hard to call right now. But as for the co-main event, this is what I want to happen. What I think probably will happen is they'll just do Pantoja versus Moreno 4, even though I would personally rather they did actually Pantoja versus Brandon Royval for the championship fight. Now, I know you could say Royval just lost to Pantoja pretty recently. It was only a couple of years ago in 2021, but he's gone on a 3-fight win streak since then. He's a great finisher. He's a marketable guy. I think that you could market this fight. It's also worth noting that Brandon Royval also weighed in as the backup as well. So, you know, like when you get someone that weighs in as the backup and makes weight, you kind of should at least consider them for the title shot instead of doing a rematch. The reason why I really don't want to see a rematch is Brandon Moreno recently has been in so many title fights. His last 6 fights have been title fights. All of these fights have been title fights, and he's only won half of them. I don't really feel like he should just be getting this constant treatment of getting title fights. I know he beat Kai Kara France for the interim bout and then beat Figueiredo. And I know the fight against Pantoja was close, but I do believe Pantoja won that fight. I just don't want to see another Brandon Moreno title fight. You know, at this point, I would rather see Brandon Moreno fight Amir Albazi. And if he can beat Amir Albazi, then yes, he should get a title shot. I do agree, but I just don't want to see another instant rematch or another instant title shot for Brandon Moreno when he's got so many of those opportunities already. I'd much rather see Alexandre Pantoja defend the belt against Brandon Royval, the co-main event of a pay-per-view, maybe even the main event of a fight night in Brazil or Colorado, because Brandon Royval has a big name in Colorado. So I think there's options you could do, but I'd much rather see Brandon Moreno fight Amir Albazi, then get the rematch against Alexandre Pantoja. I think Pantoja versus Moreno will probably happen, but honestly, I'd much rather it didn't. I'd actually genuinely much rather see Pantoja fight against Brandon Royval, defend the belt against Brandon Royval, because I think he would win that fight, and then he can fight Moreno again, or he can fight Amir Albazi, whoever wins that matchup. And now Dricus du Plessis defeated Robert Whittaker. Now, it's obvious. It's obvious what he does. He's going to fight Israel Adesanya at UFC 293. I'm seeing people say stuff like he could fight Adesanya in New Zealand. He could fight Adesanya in Africa. I was told by a pretty reliable source that both Robert Whittaker and Dricus du Plessis had actually already accepted the fight against Adesanya before they had even fought each other. So the fight is pretty much pretty much agreed to for UFC 293. We're almost definitely going to get it in Australia, although it's not really Adesanya's home country or Dricus du Plessis' home country or so. It is a fight that probably is going to happen. Volkanovski can't headline at UFC 293. Israel Adesanya lives in New Zealand. It's pretty popular over in Oceania as well, in New Zealand and Australia. They seem to do support Israel Adesanya. As you guys know, I'm not the biggest Adesanya fan, but I believe he's got a lot of fans here. But anyway, I think that's it. I think they're going to do Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis in Australia. It would be more ideal to do Robert Whittaker versus Adesanya in Australia, because Robert Whittaker actually is Australian, but it's still a massive fight. I hope that the fans get that fight, because who else is going to headline a pay-per-view in Australia and sell out the arena? It has to be Israel Adesanya. So I think you see Dricus du Plessis versus Adesanya, UFC 293. It's going to be an insane build-up. I can't wait for it. My goodness, is it going to be crazy. But now we moved on to Dan Hooker. And the answer to this, and I think everybody should have the same answer to Dan Hooker. I don't know. You can't tell with Dan Hooker. He just broke his arm. He's going to be out for 4, 5, or 6 months. And the state of lightweight right now is so unpredictable, because if you look at Dan Hooker, he's probably going to take the number 11 spot. Grant Dawson is going to want to fight before Dan Hooker is ready to fight, so maybe you have to do Grant Dawson versus Renato Moicano, or even Jalen Turner, or even Matt Frivola, or even just someone up the rankings. Who really knows what you do with Grant Dawson right now? Dan Hooker versus Renato Moicano doesn't make sense, because Moicano is probably looking for a fight right now. He hasn't fought for a long time. Matt Frivola hasn't fought since he beat Drew Dober earlier in the year. He's probably looking for an opponent. He's probably not wanting to wait another 6 months for not for Jalen Turner, for Dan Hooker. So what do you do? I believe I've heard rumors that Mateusz Gamrot is going to be fighting Rafael Fiziev, and I think he should fight the loser of that fight. And I think that maybe it's going to be Rafael Fiziev. I'm not too sure about this one, but Rafael Fiziev is a striker. Gamrot's a good wrestler. Gamrot's a really bad striker, though, so maybe if Fiziev wins, maybe you can replace Gamrot with Fiziev. You guys know what I mean. But I want this fight in New Zealand. Have Dan Hooker headline in New Zealand. New Zealand hasn't had a fight card in a very, very long time. I think Dan Hooker is the guy to do it, because Adesanya doesn't want to headline here because he's Adesanya. So I'd rather see Rafael Fiziev take on Dan Hooker in New Zealand, maybe sometime early next year, maybe February next year or something like that. So let's do it. Let's do Dan Hooker versus Rafael Fiziev early next year. I think that makes all the sense in the world. Or just Dan Hooker versus somebody in New Zealand, headline a fight night. Let's go. And now Bo Nickal just defeated Val Woodburn, and you guys are going to have to let me cook on this one, because I cooked something up that nobody else has come up with, and this is crazy. But I think it's justified. And I genuinely believe, after watching his last fight, not Bo Nickal's fight, this new guy's fight, Bo Nickal has a really good chance of winning. And it is Abus Magomedov. This would be the step up in the competition of a century. However, I think he would win. I genuinely believe that Bo Nickal would go out there and beat Abus Magomedov. Abus Magomedov showed that he's got less than a round of cardio against Sean Strickland. And if Bo Nickal can get in there, avoid the kicks, and take down Abus Magomedov and get on top, Abus Magomedov would gas out within minutes, and Bo Nickal would just have beaten a 25-5 fighter, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, I know the UFC probably isn't going to do this. The UFC is trying to build up Bo Nickal a lot slower. If Tresean Gore's injury wasn't as serious as it is, if you guys don't know, Tresean Gore is going to be out from 6 to 12 months. I would have just rebooked the Tresean Gore fight, because I know that's what the UFC wants. They want to build up Bo Nickal as slowly as they possibly can. However, this would be absolutely ridiculous, would it not? I know Bo Nickal is going to be having a child soon, so he's probably going to want to fight ASAP. Abus Magomedov probably isn't ready to fight ASAP, but I'd rather see Bo Nickal fight as soon as possible. But, you know, we just saw Abus Magomedov take a lot of damage, so maybe he's not ready to fight ASAP, but he has taken a lot of time off. You know, he hasn't fought a lot. He's on a good contract. He said that he's on a really, really good contract. So maybe he should do the UFC a favor after they just did him a favor by giving him Sean Strickland, and do Abus Magomedov versus Bo Nickal. I think that Bo Nickal would win that fight. And I think it's a good opportunity for Bo Nickal to fight somebody that may be actually at his level, because all he's doing is just beating the lower levels of 185. Val Woodburn, I told you guys before the fight even started that Val Woodburn wasn't UFC level at all, and Bo Nickal's probably going to knock him out in the first round, and that's what he did. I did pick first round submission, but I told you guys Val Woodburn's striking wasn't very good either. So you guys know exactly what I mean. I think Bo Nickal versus Abus Magomedov is the fight to make, and I think Bo Nickal would win that fight. So now we can move on to Robbie Lawler, who retired, and I don't want to see Robbie Lawler to think, I looked so good in that last fight, let's do another one. No. I want to call it for Robbie. No more fights for Robbie. Tatsuro Taira beat Edgar Chairez. I kind of ummed and ahed about a lot of different matchups that you possibly could do for Tatsuro Taira. And one of them I actually thought of was maybe Steve Erceg, because Steve Erceg recently made his short notice debut, beat a ranked opponent in David Vorjak, who's now 15, but Steve Erceg number 14. But I've actually settled on Sue Mudaerji. Now, I know recently I actually matched up Sue Mudaerji with Steven Erceg, so maybe I'm kind of contradicting myself, but I think this is a better matchup for Tatsuro Taira. You don't want to give Tatsuro Taira somebody that he will lose to. He had a really close fight against Edgar Chairez, but at this point, he's like 4-0 in the promotion, 5-0 in the promotion. He needs a big step up in competition, and he needs a big test. I understand how young he is, but even once he gets ranked, he can take time and he can fight guys that will slowly build him up, because once you get into the rankings, fighters just tend to fight a lot less often, because when you're in the rankings, fights are harder to make, so you would have more time off to kind of develop in between fights. And I would like to see Tatsuro Taira versus Sue Mudaerji. I think he would win this fight. I think he would actually submit Sue Mudaerji. I want to see it in the Singapore card, which would be ideal. However, you could do Tatsuro Taira versus Steve Erceg in Australia at UFC 293. I think that could also make sense as well. So there's a lot of different options that you could do for Tatsuro Taira. It's either David Vorjak, Steven Erceg, or Sue Mudaerji. I think that's kind of what you've got to do. And then maybe you could have him fight an unranked guy after he becomes ranked, and then fight up the rankings, and then maybe down the rankings, and kind of just slowly build him up and really pad that record a little bit. You know, for Edgar Chairez could fight anybody. I'd much rather him fight someone that he could probably win against, because I'm telling you guys, Edgar Chairez is entertainment. He's a fun fighter. He's marketable. People love him already. He did that thing on the weigh-ins with his hands. It was absolutely insane. I'm not going to redo it because I don't actually know what it means, but you guys know what I mean. Denise Gomes just knocked out Yasmin Jauregui in 20 seconds. It was insane. Now she can do the same thing to Elise Reed. It's nothing personal. Elise Reed is just really annoying. So maybe Elise Reed versus Yasmin Jauregui. Sorry, Denise Gomes would make sense. And on top of that as well, Denise Gomes and Elise Reed would be a fun fight. It would probably be a striking fight as well. Denise Gomes is an aggressive Muay Thai fighter. She comes forward, she bombs away. She's quite marketable because she's scary. Like, she is super scary. I mean, that tattoo that she's got on her neck, I don't know if her profile shows it, but oh my goodness, dude, is she, no, she just, you can't see it, but she's got a scary tattoo on her neck, man. It's insane. But anyway, Denise Gomes versus Elise Reed is a fight that I would like to see. Alonzo Menifield beat Jimmy Crute. I don't know what Jimmy Crute should do. I think he should go down to 185 pounds and start taking some serious steps down in competition, because Jimmy Crute, I've been saying it, and I said it during the Fight Companion, I said it in my prediction, Jimmy Crute is just not good. He's just not good at fighting. Maybe it's just something that he wasn't born to do, but my goodness, dude, this guy just doesn't have it at all. I want him to go at 185. He looked really small in this matchup. It almost looked like he was preparing to go down to 185. So go down to 185, which is a terrible division. He should be able to fit in pretty well there, and fight the lower guys of 185. You know, I think his time in the ranking is over for now, but I think he's still quite young. He's got time to develop. But for Alonzo Menifield is ranked, and I could be doing his opponent a massive disservice here. But I think for this opponent, Alonzo Menifield is the most beatable opponent in the rankings, and that is Dominic Reyes. I don't know what Dominic Reyes wants to do with his career. I don't know if he wants to continue fighting. He just got knocked out by Ryan Spann, which is really sad, because Ryan Spann, as everybody knows, is also terrible at fighting. So it's just a really bad look for Dominic Reyes. However, I do believe in the rankings, Alonzo Menifield is probably the most winnable opponent for Dominic Reyes. Alonzo Menifield is almost 36 years old at this point. For the most part, he's a striker that can wrestle. He's a powerful guy with somewhat bad cardio. Dominic Reyes is a really athletic guy. I think Reyes can beat Menifield. But the problem is, Menifield has insane power, and maybe he knocks out Dominic Reyes, man. I don't think this is a bad matchup to make. I think it's a better matchup to make than like most of the fights that you can make in the light heavyweight division. Because if you look at the light heavyweight division, you could do maybe Dustin Jacoby for Reyes, Azamat Murzakanov. You want to keep Azamat Murzakanov away from Dominic Reyes as much as you can. So I think Dominic Reyes versus Alonzo Menifield, it's either a gift or a curse for Reyes, but I think that's the fight to make. You could put that probably on, maybe you could even put that, no, you couldn't put that on a main card of a pay-per-view anymore. The headliner prelim of a pay-per-view, I'd say. Main card, co-main event of a fight night, maybe. Menifield versus Reyes. So we'll move down. Vitor Petrino just beat Marcin Prachnio. He looked really good and really bad at the same time. And the reason why, I'm seeing a lot of people saying it was a great performance by him, it was dominant, and it was dominant. I am happy for Vitor Petrino. I'm happy we've got a really good light heavyweight prospect. The problem I had with this matchup is Vitor Petrino could have knocked out Marcin Prachnio so many times, and he just decided not to. Vitor Petrino, before he got into the UFC, he was bombing away, he was KOing everybody in the first round. He gets into the UFC, and now he's turned into a wrestler. Not a bad thing, because it's really something that he's developed, and now he's actually quite good at it. But, man, he could have KO'd Marcin Prachnio. Like, I almost want to say Vitor Petrino was the better striker in this matchup, and the power difference between these two wasn't even close. Like, Marcin Prachnio was throwing his whole body, like, he was, like, putting everything, his hips and everything into shots, and they were landing flush on Vitor Petrino's chin. I remember one moment where Vitor Petrino was kind of standing up and he got caught by Marcin Prachnio, really kind of like bombing away like this, and he landed two clean, flush right hands on Vitor Petrino with all of his power, and Petrino just ate them. I don't know if Petrino's got a crazy chin or if Prachnio's got no power whatsoever, but the power difference in this matchup was absolutely insane. And Vitor Petrino, every time he landed on Prachnio, Prachnio didn't want it anymore, and he just chose to not knock him out. He literally decided to not knock him out. However, if Vitor Petrino wants to be a wrestler, then I think he should fight a wrestler, because he's recently been beating Anton Dricus, who is a grappler, to be fair. But Marcin Prachnio is a karate guy, or he's like a kickboxing guy, and I think you should fight a wrestler. I think you should fight a grappler in the lower ranks of the 205-pound division. Nikolai Negumereanu. I know Nikolai Negumereanu has like a really good wrestling background. I don't know what it is, but I think it's like a national wrestling champion in Romania or something along those lines. And I know that Negumereanu would test that wrestling if Vitor Petrino decided to use it. Personally, I actually think that Vitor Petrino would just knock out Negumereanu on the feet, but I did say that about the Prachnio fight. And I didn't actually put Turkalj to beat Vitor Petrino. And that wasn't actually that bad of a pick in hindsight. But anyway, Nikolai Negumereanu, I think he would test the wrestling, but I think Vitor Petrino would knock him out on the feet as well. So this would be a close fight though, and it would really test the wrestling and the grappling of Vitor Petrino. I think this is a fight to make. He hasn't fought in a long time, since last year, since he got KO'd by Olberg. So Nikolai Negumereanu versus Vitor Petrino. You could do it in Brazil on that Brazilian card, or you could just do it on an Apex fight night somewhere. I think there's a lot of options you could do for Petrino, but I think Negumereanu was like the most appropriate test for what he's trying to do in his career, which is strike and wrestle and grapple. I'm all for him becoming more well-rounded, but when it comes to this matchup against Marcin Prachnio, when he could have knocked him out and he just decided not to, that just shows bad fight IQ in my eyes. But Cameron Saaiman defeated Terrence Mitchell. Mitchell made a pretty good account for himself, although the fight only lasted 3 minutes. Mitchell had a moment where he was on top and he was looking pretty good, but then Saaiman ended up flattening him out, and there's just nothing Mitchell really seemed like he could be able to do. It was a ground and pound TKO. Good win for Saaiman. He took no damage. Welcome to Australia, Cameron Saaiman. If Cameron Saaiman is going to be fighting, if Dricus du Plessis is going to be fighting Adesanya in Australia on UFC 293, let's keep these two together. Let's have Cameron Saaiman on that card as well, against a guy that isn't Australian, but a guy that lives somewhere near Australia in a way. You've kind of got to binge geography a little bit, but South Korea is a very accessible country from Australia. I believe all you've got to do is just fly to Singapore and then to South Korea. So I think Kyung Hyo Kang will have no issues coming over to Australia and fighting at UFC 293 against Cameron Saaiman. This is a massive step up in competition for Saaiman, a much bigger step up in competition from Terrence Mitchell to Kyung Hyo Kang. But Kyung Hyo Kang's a guy that's been testing prospects recently, man. He just turned away Butgaray Dinar, and after like years away as well, I believe. A year away, I mean. So, and then he fought Christian Canones and beat Christian Canones in under half a round, which was crazy. So let's give him the Cameron Saaiman test, or let's give Cameron Saaiman the Kyung Hyo Kang test. I thought about giving Cameron Saaiman the Rani Yahya test, But I was like, man, like that's way too big of a step up in competition for Cameron Saman. You could rebook the Christian Rodriguez fight. That's cool as well. But Cameron Saman, Kyung Ho Kang in Australia, or you could sign an Australian bantamweight. I can't think of one off the top of my head and have him fight Cameron Saman, but that's just kind of lazy. And probably at this point, Cameron Saman just padding his record a little bit. So Saman versus Kyung Ho Kang makes sense to me. Jesus Aguilar absolutely demolished Shannon Ross. In fact, Jesus Aguilar sent Shannon Ross to visit his father for a second there, because I thought he might have, mate, I thought Shannon Ross wasn't going to be coming back to Australia. That's all I'm going to say. Man, it was bad. Shannon Ross was out cold for about a minute. Jesus Aguilar put absolutely everything he could into that right hand. Beautiful KO. He should fight Clayton Carpenter. I mean, there's not really a lot of options. There's a like flyweight is a. Here's the thing: flyweight is a division where not many people are unranked, because there's only like 35 flyweights on the roster, and there's going to be a lot more after Dana White's Contender Series, but there's not a lot of flyweights on the roster at all. And Jesus Aguilar is going to have to run into a prospect at one point. Clayton Carpenter, he actually beat Edgar Chairez, who was on Dana White's Contender Series. I don't know if Chairez and Aguilar trained together, but there could be a connection there. He beat Ronderos, but that was a pretty easy win for him. He was meant to fight Usyk, and he's like minus 300 over Usyk, which is crazy in hindsight, maybe. But I think Clayton Carpenter versus Jesus Aguilar makes sense. Esteban Ridovic beat up Koala Kirk on the feet in the second and the third round. There was a scare in the first after Kirk got his back and almost subbed him in the first round, but Esteban Ridovic didn't really get to showcase his skills on the feet. This guy is fun. He is fun. I was going to start swearing because I think he's so fun. He hasn't really been able to showcase anything in the UFC yet, but I want to give him a guy that's going to stand and bang with him. Esteban Ridovic versus Manuel Torres on that Mexican Independence Day card, the Grasso versus Shevchenko 2 card. This is it, man. This is like a prelim headliner. Manuel Torres versus Esteban Ridovic. The general public or the more casual fans won't know who Esteban Ridovic or Manuel Torres are, but they will know who they are after this fight, because this will be an absolutely insane, lights out banger. Somebody will get KO'd in the first round. I've got a feeling. You see, I love Esteban Ridovic. I mean, this isn't me just matching up someone who I think that he can beat, because if I could do that, I would just give him like Gabriel Miranda or something like that. So I'm going to go Esteban Ridovic versus Manuel Torres because I believe this is a banger. This is a 50-50 fight on paper because both guys have KO power. Both guys fight like crazy. I think most people might actually pick Manuel Torres in their matchup, but I think Esteban Ridovic has a good chance at winning. So I think that'll be a banger. That's a fight to put on that Mexican Independence Day card. I absolutely love that fight. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And with all that being said, let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know like who you would match who up with. Let me know if you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you disagree with anything I said. And with all that being said, I will see you guys in the next video.